To be honest, there hasn't been a chance to think about it because it's been constant phone calls, emails, messages, interviews. So I don't think it's really sunk in. It's kind of surreal.
No one believed the Vatican rumor until it was confirmed. A sealed envelope was discovered in a private drawer inside the Apostolic Palace, weeks after Pope Francis's death, while the Church was still coming to terms with Pope Leo XIV's election. No public announcement had ever been made. No Vatican press bulletin mentioned its existence. And yet, there it was, a handwritten letter from Pope Francis, addressed not to a confidant or his successor by name, but to a man who had no idea he would one day wear the white cassock. "To the one who will come after me," the letter reportedly said, "if this reaches you, then Providence has done what I could not." What about the recipient? Cardinal Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV. The revelation came as a shock to a church that was still dealing with one of the most dramatic transitions in modern Catholic history. Suddenly, the papal succession wasn't just the result of conclave ballots and whispering campaigns. There was a new story, a secret correspondence, a spiritual bequest, or even a final appeal. The Vatican has yet to officially release the letter's full text. However, sources close to the papal household confirmed its authenticity. They claim Francis wrote it in his own hand in the last few months of his life and sealed it with his personal coat of arms. It was not addressed to Leo XIV, of course. Francis had no idea, but it was clearly intended for whoever took his place. According to the same sources, what's inside is not only heartfelt, but also explosive. It is not a resignation, one insider said quietly. There's a reckoning, a map, a warning, a final message from one shepherd to another. The discovery stunned the Curia, shook the College of Cardinals, and reopened every unresolved question about Francis's true intentions for the Church's future. And now all eyes are on the man who received it, Pope Leo XIV. Will he follow the path or stop doing it? When white smoke rose above St. Peter's Basilica and the world heard the name Robert Prevost, many Catholics, including devout ones, blinked in surprise. Robert Francis Prevost? From Chicago? He was not on the short lists. He did not write the headlines for the speculation articles. He had not made headlines for divisive synodal positions or viral sermons. If anything, Cardinal Prevost had built his career around not being noticed, at least by the public. But within the College of Cardinals, the decision was not a fluke. To those who had watched the Church fray over the last decade, Cardinal Prevost represented something desperately needed: balance, competence, and most importantly, peace. Robert Prevost was born in Chicago in 1955 to a devout Catholic family. He joined the Order of St. Augustine and was ordained a priest in 1982. His early years were marked by intellectual discipline and a pastoral heart, as he earned advanced degrees in canon law in Rome, before beginning his ministry in one of the Church's most overlooked frontiers, Peru. He served in the Diocese of Chiclayo as a missionary with calloused hands and fluent Spanish, rather than as an administrator from abroad. He earned the trust of both local clergy and lay people through authenticity rather than charisma. He understood the terrain of faith and poverty, and he understood those who walked it. In 2014, Pope Francis appointed him as the Apostolic Administrator of Chiclayo, and a year later, he was named bishop. By 2020, he was summoned to Rome to serve as prefect of the dicastery for bishops, one of the most powerful positions in the Vatican bureaucracy. Suddenly, the quiet missionary from Peru had the ability to influence the global Church's episcopal leadership. In a decade marked by ecclesiastical strife between left and right, tradition and progress, Cardinal Prevost was frequently viewed as a neutral arbiter. He made few public statements and was not associated with either extreme. He did not conduct wide-ranging interviews. While other clerics argued in the media about hot-button issues, Prevost simply did his job, with competence, consistency, and no scandal. He became well known in Rome as the cardinal to whom other cardinals turned for advice. He listened more than he spoke, one cardinal stated following the conclave. But when he did speak, you realized he'd already been thinking 5 steps ahead. Prevost chose a memorable name for his election, Leo XIV. It was a deliberate echo of Pope Leo XIII, the 19th century pontiff who defended doctrinal orthodoxy while also confronting modern challenges. Leo XIII was both a lion and a diplomat, and by choosing this name, Pope Leo XIV sent a message to the world. I won't yell, I won't tweet, but I'm going to take the lead. Despite his low public profile, Cardinal Prevost was reportedly highly trusted by Pope Francis. His appointment to oversee bishops was interpreted as a sign of that confidence. But their theological temperaments differed. Whereas Francis enjoyed unpredictability, Leo preferred canon clarity. Leo speaks in formulas, whereas Francis communicates through gestures. So when the late Pope Francis penned a letter, now known to be addressed to Prevost, he was most likely fully aware of the man he was entrusting it to. Not a populist, not a radical, but a steward. With the letter in hand and the weight of the papacy on his shoulders, Pope Leo XIV begins his reign in the shadow of a spiritual father, and under the scrutiny of a world waiting to see if he will carry Francis's fire or extinguish it. Despite centuries of tradition and secrecy, the Vatican continues to surprise. But nothing in recent memory has matched what was discovered days after Pope Francis's funeral. A sealed letter, handwritten, unpublished, and deeply personal. It was not found in an archive or a vault. It was not part of the public record or the papal will. According to multiple sources inside the Apostolic Palace, it was discovered tucked inside a locked wooden drawer in the late pontiff's private study, a place only a few had ever visited. And it was addressed to Robert Francis Prevost, not by name but by destiny. The envelope read, "To my successor," in Pope Francis's careful spidery script. Whoever he may be, but especially if it is you. The letter bore the papal seal, but was not registered in the Vatican archives. It was reportedly dated just 4 months before Francis died, at a time when his health was rapidly deteriorating and whispers of resignation were becoming louder. Why didn't he mention it? Why didn't it become public sooner? Why was it hidden? Some believe the letter was intended to be discovered after the conclave and papal elections, when the recipient was no longer a cardinal but the Pope. Francis may have feared his letter could sway votes, said one Vatican insider. He did not want to interfere with the Holy Spirit, but he wanted to be heard. The timing is chillingly accurate. The letter surfaced just 48 hours after Pope Leo XIV was elected. The Vatican Secretary for Private Affairs, a position few even know exists, reportedly handed it to the new pope during a private meeting, saying only, "He left this for you." The pope, stunned, reportedly read the letter alone in St. Gregory's chapel for more than an hour. He hasn't spoken about it publicly. He has also not released the full text, but its existence is no longer in question. According to sources close to Pope Leo XIV, the letter is not doctrinal. It is not a theological treatise or an endorsement of any particular policy. It is rather a deeply personal reflection that combines prayer, warning, and legacy. In it, Francis is said to reflect on his own papacy with surprising candor. He speaks of triumphs, such as synodality's global reach and his efforts to bring the church to the margins, but he also expresses regret. "I opened the windows," he allegedly wrote, "but I may have forgotten to secure the foundation." The letter goes on to warn about wolves in shepherd's clothing, a phrase Francis has previously used to describe those within the church who appear to be loyal but quietly undermine reform. But most importantly, he mentions Prevost. "If you are the one reading this, Robert," the letter says, "then you know that leadership is not a reward, it is a wound." He urges the new pope to protect the poor, listen to the silent, and remember that mercy must be based on truth, but it should never be used as a tool of control. It is not an order. It is not even a directive. It is a spiritual handoff. The letter's discovery has reignited a new debate within the Church. Should a private communication between two popes influence the direction of the global Church? Some argue that the letter is divinely inspired timing, a final testament from a pope who knew his time was limited and wanted his deepest thoughts preserved, not manipulated, but respected. Others see things differently. A hidden letter after death? A senior prelate scoffed. That is not a legacy. That is an attempt to steer the wheel from the grave. Regardless, the letter is now housed in the Vatican's private archive. Pope Leo XIV read it and shared portions with his closest advisors. According to all accounts, one phrase stands out above the rest: be a bridge, not the wall. The world awaits Leo's decision to follow Francis's example or forge his own path. What does a dying pope say to the next man to wear the white cassock? What can one shepherd give another when the weight of eternity is about to shift from one soul to the next? According to insiders who have read it and spoken with Pope Leo XIV in the quiet hours since its delivery, Pope Francis's lost letter is neither a political memo nor a list of policies. It is more raw, more vulnerable, and far more disturbing. It is, by all accounts, the final words of a man who spent his papacy balancing truth and mercy, tradition and reform, and now, with time running out, has decided to admit what even his closest advisors have never heard out loud. The letter begins without a formal salutation, simply, "To my successor," followed by a long pause and a statement that reportedly reads like both a sigh and a prophecy. "If this reaches you, then Providence has done what I could not." That line alone, according to sources, set the tone for what came next. Not an endorsement, but a surrender. Not a blessing, but a burden. Francis goes on to reflect on his own time as Pope with unexpected emotional intensity. He describes the joys, the sounds of migrants singing in St. Peter's Square, synodal voices reaching him from hidden corners of the church, and the faces of children touched by mercy rather than dogma. But then the tone changes. He describes confusion, resistance, and in a rare instance of ecclesial honesty, betrayal. "I opened the church," he writes, "but many only walked in to measure its cracks." He mentions bishops who smiled in public but sabotaged in secret. He claims he felt surrounded not by enemies, but by men who feared change more than they feared judgment. The letter then addresses Cardinal Robert Prevost directly. This is where the writing changes, less poetic and more piercing. "You were not my loudest supporter," Francis writes. "However, I trusted your silence. And now that the Church has given you something I never asked for, power, I pray you will not seek to keep it. I hope you can learn to carry it without letting it carry you." Francis does not provide instructions, but he issues warnings. "Beware of those who use doctrine as armor," he writes, "and those who use mercy as a disguise. Both will be flattering to you. Both will betray you." Then comes the most contentious passage, which was reportedly underlined twice in the original. "Do not lead with certainty. Lead by faith. Certainty is reserved for the powerful. Faith is for the poor." Those words have caused murmurs in the Curia. Some interpret it as a rebuke to rising traditionalism. Others interpreted it as a call to value pastoral courage over rigid ideology. But no one questions its power. The Pope Emeritus, from beyond the grave, reminds his successor that authority in the Church cannot come from a throne. It must originate from the cross. Later in the letter, Francis pleads, and yes, that is reportedly the word he uses, with the Church to remember the marginalized. "If they vanish from your vision, so will Christ," he says. He encourages Leo to make the Church uncomfortable, even at the expense of his own comfort. "The world will ask you to define, but Christ asked us to listen." The letter ends not with instructions, but with a confession. Francis writes that he does not know if he was successful. He is not sure if he was too open, too ambiguous, or too eager to embrace change. "But I know this," he adds. "I tried to love the Church, even though it broke my heart." A final sentence is written at the bottom in almost illegible handwriting. "Do not forget the sound of weeping." Those who have seen Pope Leo XIV since reading the letter claim he has changed, subtly but unmistakably. He speaks from his chest rather than using legal phrases. His public silence has grown heavier, his gaze more distant. A man once known for his order and calm is now carrying something more profound, the weight of not only his own papacy, but also the ghost of the one that preceded it. He has not made any public comments about the letter, and maybe he never will. However, inside the marble walls of the Vatican, where nothing is ever completely hidden, everyone knows the truth. Francis has gone. However, his voice, both ink and soul, has not stopped speaking. The current occupant of Peter's throne must decide whether to continue the legacy of the previous message or to take the Church in new directions. When Pope Leo XIV emerged from the Apostolic Palace's private chapel after reading the letter, those closest to him reported that he appeared to have aged 5 years in one afternoon. He had gone in alone, carrying only the sealed envelope bearing Francis's coat of arms. He emerged hours later, shoulders lowered, eyes reddened, lips drawn tight in the way men do when hit by something unexpected. A few aides reportedly approached him and asked if he was okay. He just nodded. One word, yes. But everyone present knew he wasn't the same man who had walked in. According to sources close to the papal household, he did not speak about the letter for several days. Not during the morning mass, not during a private audience, not even in his initial meetings with key advisors. It was like he had entered mourning, said one insider, but not for Pope Francis, for something else, perhaps because he now knew what was expected of him. At a closed-door meeting with his former dicastery staff, Leo was seen clutching a rosary tightly, as if he needed it to stay grounded. He allegedly quoted a passage from the Gospel of John. "When you were younger, you went wherever you wanted. But when you're old, someone will put a belt around you and lead you somewhere you don't want to go." Those present claim it wasn't just a verse, it was a mirror. Leo XIV had never been a man who sought attention. His record reflected discipline, not drama, a leader who valued wisdom over prophecy. But the letter had altered something. It had cut through his institutional instincts and struck a much deeper chord, one that every true pastor shares: the fear of failing the flock. The Vatican has not issued a public statement regarding the letter, and Leo has not confirmed any of the reported lines. However, in his first Sunday Angelus following the letter's discovery, he delivered a quiet but telling message. "There are times," he said from the window above St. Peter's Square, "when the truth arrives not in thunder, but in a whisper we didn't ask to hear and cannot unhear." He didn't mention Francis. He did not have to, because everyone watching through the window knew the whisper had reached him, and now the burden of responding had begun. The question is quietly echoing through Vatican corridors, whispered in seminaries, and debated in diocesan offices all over the world. Is Pope Leo XIV truly leading the Church, or is he following the final wishes of a man now buried beneath St. Peter's? The lost letter from Pope Francis, a deeply personal, unfiltered message discovered only after the conclave, has ushered the Church into an unusual new era. Not since John Paul II's death and Benedict XVI's rise to power has there been such unspoken tension during a papal transition. But this time, it's not just about legacy. It's more intimate and uncomfortable. Pope Francis may be gone. However, his voice, fears, and hopes, which are now written down, continue to shape the most powerful office in Catholicism. Insiders claim Leo XIV is well aware of the implications. He understands that every decision he makes will now be judged not only against the catechism or canon law, but also against the words of a man who chose to speak only when he could no longer be questioned. The Church is unfamiliar with this dynamic, a living pope carrying the ghost of his predecessor's conscience in his coat pocket. Some conservative bishops are already reacting negatively. One cardinal reportedly told colleagues, "The conclave chose Leo over Francis's echo chamber." Others see the letter as providential, with the Holy Spirit working in the silence to ensure that the torch of reform is not extinguished by bureaucracy or fear. Theological debate is escalating. Is the letter a spiritual blessing or undue influence? Should it be treated as a compass or archived as a private reflection? Pope Leo XIV, to his credit, has said very little. However, what he has not said speaks volumes. He did not dismiss the letter. He has not disavowed its emotional significance. In several early addresses, he hinted at continuity cloaked in conscience, without naming Francis. "We do not walk alone," he told a gathering of priests last week. "We are accompanied by the voices of those who came before us, especially those who died with their hearts still burning." Some see this as a poetic homage. Others see it as a direct reference to Francis, and possibly an early sign that Leo will lead as a careful steward of unfinished business rather than a disruptor. But a deeper, more unsettling possibility is being quietly investigated in Vatican circles. What if Francis knew this? What if he wrote the letter not to console his successor but to shape him? What if Pope Francis, sensing the possibility of his reforms being reversed, planted the letter as a theological time capsule, a ghost-written manifesto meant to whisper in Leo's ear long after the Sistine doors had closed? If this is the case, it raises one last haunting question. In 2025, who truly leads the Catholic Church? What about the man on the balcony, or the one whose final words remained silent until now? The backlash did not take long to begin. Inside the Vatican, where smiles are formal and rivalries are eternal, the discovery of Pope Francis's letter has not been well received, particularly by members of what many refer to, only half-jokingly, as the Old Guard. These are the men who remained silent for nearly a decade as Pope Francis pushed the limits of papal leadership. Men who opposed synodality, questioned the softening of doctrine, and desired a return to structure and clarity. To them, the Francis era was more than just uncomfortable. It was chaotic. And just as they thought the Church would be reset under a more measured hand in Leo XIV, Francis's ghost reappeared, bringing influence with him. "This is not how the Church governs," a senior archbishop reportedly told a colleague. "We are not ruled by letters written in secret. Anger exists, but also fear. Because, while Pope Leo XIV has not formally pledged obedience to the letter, his silence speaks volumes, and to some, it reads as acquiescence. If Leo allows the late Pope's emotional plea to shape major decisions, Francis's influence may extend beyond his death. According to sources, several conservative cardinals have already met informally to discuss what they see as a dangerous precedent. Some are even considering urging Leo to publicly clarify the letter's relevance, not out of disrespect, but out of concern for institutional integrity. One curial insider summed up the unease simply: "If dead popes can guide living ones, what is the point of a conclave?" Nonetheless, the irony is palpable. These same men who once accused Francis of breaking tradition are now demanding that Leo XIV disregard a letter written by the man who appointed him to Rome. The real question now is whether Leo will stick to his plan or begin to quietly push back against the shadow trailing his every step. Because one thing is clear: not every shepherd in the Vatican wants Francis's ghost whispering in the room. The Catholic Church has always been a story told in succession, with one shepherd passing the crook to the next, each papacy marked by the sacred tension between continuity and change. However, this time the torch was passed without ceremony. It arrived in ink, in silence, in a sealed envelope discovered after the world had moved on. However, it may prove to be the most influential moment of all. Pope Francis did not live to see how his final words influenced the future. He didn't know how deeply his letter would shake the man who followed him, but he seemed to know, somehow, that the Church would continue to fight the same battles long after he was gone, that doctrine, division, mercy, and mistrust would endure beyond any single papacy. He realized that his only remaining weapon was honesty. He imparted that honesty to one man, Robert Prevost. The current pope is Leo XIV, and now the entire world is watching to see what that man will do with it. Will Leo double down on clarity, drawing a distinction between his papacy and Francis's? Will he let the letter's quiet plea for mercy, humility, and a church that listens guide his every step? Perhaps he will find a way to accomplish both. Maybe he already has. Because this is the power paradox in the Catholic Church. It is not inherited. It has endured. And what Pope Francis left behind was not a commandment. This was a confession, a final act of trust between one shepherd and another, a belief that the truth, no matter how delayed, would eventually reach the right hands. And now that it has, the Church's future is based on more than just doctrine. The decision to carry the weight of both mercy and memory rests in the hands. Because in Rome, some legacies conclude with a funeral. Others, however, begin after the tomb is sealed. And this one has only just started.